I now call to order the regular scheduled meeting of the Board of Zoning Appeals. And Greg, I want to welcome you back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
The notice for this meeting to the public, the time, the date, the place, and the agenda was published as a legal notice on April the 2nd, 2018 in the Aiken Standard. Notice to contiguous property owners was mailed, and the public notice signs were posted on or about April 4th, 2018. Notice of this meeting was sent to the webmaster and to the city clerk for posting on the Finance and Administration Building Notice Board and the Municipal Building Notice Board at least 24 hours before this meeting. Agenda sheets were mailed or emailed to interested parties. As a reminder, it is unlawful for any person giving testimony to this board knowingly providing false information. That's according to Section 22-9 of the Aiken Municipal Code. Each infraction is a separate offense with a penalty of up to 30 days in jail and or a fine of $1,092.50. Persons that wish to address the board, we ask that you occupy the cubicle in front of us. Please state your name or your address and your address. If anyone wish to receive copies of today's proceedings, we ask that you sign up on the sign-up sheet just beyond the double doors, or you may call the City of Aiken's Planning Department. To the board, you have received copies of the February 27th, 2018 minutes of our meeting. Are there any corrections or additions?
I did some before the meeting.
Nancy.
It was just grammar and somebody's name spelled incorrectly.
You passed them on to the city. Thank you. The chair would entertain a motion.
I move that we accept the minutes of the February 27th, 2018 meeting.
Second that motion.
Probably second Judy and Nancy. Do we have any questions? Those in favor of the motion, show by raise of the right hand. The motion is carried. Brendan, you were not here and not voting. The motion is carried. Greg, do we have any final orders for
Yes,
signature?
we do. I've got 4 original sets of orders.
Thank you. That is the only item of old business. We'll move directly into new business. I call your attention to application 18-92005, a request for a special exception to allow a commercial stable in a property zone residential single-family stable, RASS, and that's pursuant to Section 3.15 of the zoning ordinance. The property is located at lot number 4, Woods Edge Way, to the city. Has this been properly posted?
Yes, it has.
Any inquiries that you wish to share with the board?
We did not receive any at the office.
Thank you. You have a presentation for us?
Perhaps the first thing to ask would be, is the applicant or a representative of the applicant present? Okay.
Yes.
All right. Just making sure. As you heard, this is an application for a special exception to allow a commercial stable on a lot 4 in Woods End subdivision. Woods End subdivision is a 20-acre, 5-lot, equestrian-oriented subdivision on Hitchcock Parkway. It is bordered by Fox Chase on its eastern side and by Hitchcock Woods on its northern and western side. As the chair indicated, the subdivision is zoned single-family residential stable, RSS. In that zoning district, a commercial stable is allowed by special exception. In order for it to be approved as a special exception, the board must review the 11 special exception criteria contained in section 6.2.18 of the ordinance. If the special exception is granted, the applicants then would be able to apply to develop a commercial stable as described in their application in accordance with the city's development standards and in accordance with the operational standards of sections 3.321C and D. These are standards that apply to both commercial and pleasure stables, with the exception of item 5 in subparagraph C. Item 5 does not apply in the RSS zoning district. The original application requested the location of the commercial stable on Lot 4 of Woods End subdivision. That's Lot 4 Woods End Way, the street in the subdivision. The original application showed development of the lot into 8 paddocks for grazing horses and turnout. That application was subsequently amended with a letter dated April 6th, which went into greater detail about what the aspects of the proposed commercial stable would be. And that was that the intent was to be able to board 8 to 12 horses using shed row barns and broad fenced paddocks. The fencing of anywhere from 6 to 8 grass paddocks for the turnout and grazing support I mentioned a few seconds ago. Parking pads for 3 recreational vehicles that would have water and electrical connections, but no black water connections. And other support facilities and services such as that you would find for a stable, trailer parking, wash stations, things of that nature. Your application packet has some photographs of the lot, Lot 4, the adjoining lot, Lot 3, which is also tangentially part of the application, since the applicants intend to build a residence and a pleasure stable on Lot 3. There is a photograph, a typical photograph of what let me turn back. What the type of shed stall barn that they intend to build. This is not submitted by the applicant. It was put in just as an indication of the kind of facility that would be permitted. A few other photographs that are part of the application show the lot as it's seen from Woods End Way, as it's seen from Hitchcock Parkway, and a few other shots that are just general shots of the area. That's basically what I got.
Greg, turn to Exhibit F. And when you talked in terms of the items, the facilities across 18, you talked in terms of a cooling quarry. Where is that?
If you're looking at Exhibit F, in the lower left-hand corner, you can see the edge of the quarry.
Yeah.
If you look at Exhibit H,
Okay.
you can see the quarry in all of its glory. Sorry about the poetry. This is being actively mined for kaolin.
It is currently being mined.
Yes.
But this is an old photograph. It does not show the Center for Primary Care.
No, it does not. It shows the zoning for it in Exhibit H, the blue office zoning, but the photograph itself does not show the actual development.
Thank you. Now will you turn to page 5?
Page 5.
And at the end of the paragraph, we need to talk about this. End of the first paragraph, where you talk in terms of section 3.4.G.6 of the zoning ordinance and the date that you give, and that reference satellite dish antennas and not the item that we're talking about. Should we do something to have the ordinance reflect? I imagine we are going to talk about section 3.2.3, where this ought to be added in terms of recreational vehicles, or campers for trailers or horses or whatever. Am I correct?
With regard to the first item you mentioned, the director's interpretation number 2, dated 1999, the only reason we added that to the staff report was that the applicant had mentioned that there was a restriction of 3 trailers on a lot at any time, and that was based on this interpretation. Well, when we looked at the interpretation and then tried to reference the section 3.4.6 and saw that that section not only did but still does regulate satellite dish antennas, we just wanted to have that in there as information saying that we are rather skeptical about that interpretation being applicable to this application.
Thank you. Do we have further questions from the board to the city?
I do, Mr. Chairman.
John?
You mentioned that item 5 of 3C, I'm sorry, C5 of 3321 is not relevant here. Can you explain why?
Okay, item 5 of 3321C says, except in the RSS and HD districts, horses must be stabled and otherwise kept in areas on the premises. So it begins by exempting any use in the RSS and HD districts. That's why it does not apply to this.
I'm sorry, repeat that for me. I didn't understand.
Item 5 exempts development in RSS and HD from its requirements.
Okay, why?
The best I can tell you is that pleasure and commercial stables can be located in any residential district. If this were, say, RS 15, that section would apply, and it would be very difficult to locate a stable in an RS 15 lot that met this requirement. So it's basically, it's intended for pleasure stables more than commercial stables, but it applies to both.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions of the board to the city?
About these recreational
Nancy?
vehicles. I was asking questions about this, and not in relationship to this particular one just recently. And, all right, it says in here, a recreational vehicle may be parked anywhere on a residential lot for a period not to exceed 24 hours.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically saying you could, someone could put an RV in the front yard of their house, and as long as it wasn't there for more than 24 hours, it would meet the requirement of the ordinance. but you cannot park it there permanently in the front yard or any place that the ordinance prohibits.
Any place on the lot, or explain it just for a residential property, what you're allowed to do?
Residential property, a recreational vehicle can be placed on either side of the house as long as it's behind the front of the house.
But you're not supposed to be able to see it, correct?
Well, you can see it when it's on either side of the house. It's just they're not as prominent or visible.
But it shouldn't protrude beyond the front plane of the main structure.
Correct. The idea is to not allow the recreational vehicles to be the primary thing you see in the driveway or the front yard. There's some level of screening that is provided by the vehicle being required to be on the side of the house. And if it's behind the house, then it is completely screened from the street. Although if there's a neighbor behind the house, they may be able to see it. And one thing I'll mention, and this was something I didn't realize, but our ordinance allows up to 3 recreational vehicles on a residential lot, as long as they're being kept in accordance with these locational requirements.
Greg, I have to ask, what is that solar panel for that's on the lot? There's a solar panel controlling something.
Yeah, that little one right at the end of the
Yes.
cul-de-sac, it's on city-owned property. It's part of the drainage easement for the subdivision. I saw it, and I've actually was digging around a little bit trying to figure out what it might do, and I really couldn't find a reason for it.
Okay,
It's so small, it's got to be a microprocessor of some sort.
thank you. Other questions from the board to the city?
What is Blackwater facility?
Sanitary sewage.
I was going to save that for the applicant.
Well, I just didn't know what the definition was. I Googled it and couldn't find it.
Yeah.
Thanks, Greg. Ms. Wilson? Yes. State your name and address for the
Okay.
record.
Ann Wilson, 132 Irene Way, Lexington, South Carolina.
And you receive a copy of the staff reports. Do you wish to embellish the report or just respond to and from questions from the board?
I'd be happy just to respond. It seemed pretty thorough.
Again, as a former recreational vehicle owner, Blackwater is the sewer connection?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Question from the board to Ms. Wilson.
Ms. Wilson, I had one question
Karen.
just regarding the terminology of broad fenced. Is that a typo? Was it actually board fencing, or is broad fencing a different term as far
I
as?
think the intention was board fencing.
Okay. Is it 3 or 4 board fencing intended for the paddocks?
To be determined.
Okay.
Although, upon reflection, there's the fencing that's the anti-climb fencing. That seems to be even safer for horses, so that may be amended. And it also prevents coyotes and things like that to get into the horses.
Will you have a perimeter fence around
Absolutely.
the actual paddocks
Oh,
that?
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, Hitchcock goes right through there, and you can't take any chances of somebody getting out.
The other question that I had was in regards to the placement. I understand you amended with the shed row stable. And the original drawing on the exhibit that was provided showed just the paddocks. Have you determined where the shed row would be placed on the property?
Well, you know, a lot of that would depend on where the recreational vehicles, because I understand they have to be back. So there definitely is not hammered out exactly perfectly, because then you also have to put where the parking would be and things of that nature. But the idea is they'd be closer up towards the road.
Towards Hitchcock Parkway?
Yes, yeah, or towards, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I noticed when I was there today that the noise from Hitchcock Parkway is very prominent. Is that going to be a problem?
And that's an excellent question, because that's something my husband and I have been talking quite a bit about. And we've talked to some pretty experienced equestrians in the area and asked their opinions and thoughts. And for the most part, they feel that it would be fine. Concerns on our part would be if somebody's on Hitchcock, you know, and sirens are going by or people are hitting the horn. And if it's a more excitable horse, more of a hot blood, that is something we've thought about. And you know, we've talked to a builder and asked what our options would be, and he recommended, he said, you can put in, of course this would be another permit, but put up fencing in there and have ivy growing on it, which would really deaden the sound. His recommendation was nothing deadens sound better than vegetation. So having kind of like a living green wall at the edge of the properties. Facing Hitchcock Parkway.
Right.
You'd want to have 8 horses on the property, max?
I would say maximum, yes. Some riders prefer their horses not to be put out into paddocks, be turned out for various reasons, especially if they're show horses. They don't want any risk of injury to the horse, or some riders don't, the sun can have a bleaching effect on their coat. So it would really depend on that, but yeah, I think 8 horses would be maximum on a lot that
They're going to
size.
be pleasure riding horses, or they might be show horses? Would there be
They
any
would be-
race horses?
Yeah, they would be whatever the client is using their animal for.
What would be the absolute maximum number of horses?
I was surprised when I had read through the zoning that actually there's no limit on the number of horses if it's a conforming lot in the RSS, which did surprise me a little bit, and that's why we put the range in there of 8 to 12.
Okay.
But if you have, you know, you have parking and you have shed row, I'd really at this point think 8 would be the absolute maximum to comfortably have horses on a lot that size.
But 12 could show up there.
12 could. I would think that that would be strictly on a, perhaps, you know, there's a show in the woods and somebody wants to keep their horse for 2 nights and they're just in a stall for,
Right.
you know, 2 nights and then they're leaving. But on a ongoing basis, 8 would be the absolute ongoing basis maximum.
Thank you.
After you build the paddocks, and just on the, I'll call it the commercial lot, you know, not your residential lot, and then you pour the pads and all, how much open land is there going to be for the horses?
It would be probably just a hair under 3 acres, depending on how cleverly it's designed and how efficiently we use the space. I would say the minimum would be 2.75 acres, but probably closer to 3 because the lot's a little over 4.
I had to refer, John, you asked an excellent question, because when I looked at the facility and I discussed this with my wife, we talked about the same thing, that RASS does not define a limit for horses. But elsewhere in the ordinances describing other properties, they do define the number of horses per acre, or if you have additional horses, you must have additional acreage. Looking at 12 horses on that lot. Would you be opposed if we establish a limit to the horses?
No problems at all.
I certainly feel uncomfortable with 12
Yes.
on 4-point-something
Yeah,
acres.
and that was kind of our thought too. We put 8 to 12 because we thought, well, we're going to put in a range on that. But as I said, I was surprised when we read the zoning, and I was like, oh, wow. Usually it's an acre a horse, or at least
Right.
An acre for, I've actually heard the terminology, 1.5 horses per acre. But it depends. I've had other people say, no, 2 horses per acre, depending on how you do your, pasture management can be done. And then there's people who choose not to have their horse turned out at all.
And the second question, recreational vehicles. I used to be a recreational vehicle owner.
Okay.
And aren't you stretching the limit if someone is parked for 2 weeks, and do they have storage capacity for that much sewage?
No.
I would think that would be their issue, but yeah, I would think
Yeah.
the ordinance says 2 weeks, so we were just kind of going by what was already currently in place. I can't imagine somebody, wanting to do that for 2 weeks, but once again, for horse shows and things of that nature, 3 days to 7 days is, I would think, pretty typical.
And do you know where they would go to find a dump station in Aiken?
No, ma'am, that I do not know.
And I don't think that there is.
I don't think so.
Business opportunity. Yeah, forgive me, I did not research that. I was not aware that there was not a dumping facility here.
I'm not saying that there's not, but I'm not aware of one, because my family used to come and visit in their motorhome.
Okay. Yeah, no, I did not research that. That didn't actually even occur to us to look up.
I did have one other question.
Go ahead, Nancy.
When you're building and putting all these paddocks and stuff in, are you going to have a retention pond for all the water runoff? Because there's not going to be vegetation where the horses are. What's the plan for that?
Well, yeah, there would be vegetation. It would be grass. It's, I believe, they've already put in Bermuda grass, but it seems to not have taken real well. But no, it has to be.
Somebody on here that knows more about horses than I do, but usually the horses kind of damage all the grass, and it's just usually all mud stuff. And
Yeah,
so that's why I'm asking about the runoff.
Yeah, and that's, with pasture management, it depends on how long you allow a horse to graze there's an actual formula for that, on how long they can graze per space and how long you have to give the grass time to recover. Ideally, you keep your pastures in good shape, and so the runoff is not as much of an issue. I would think if the board needed that, we could certainly get an engineering workup on that if necessary.
You're going to have 8 horses, let's say, and 2 pastures?
No, it'd probably be smaller paddocks. It'd probably put 4 to 6, probably 6.
To go out and exercise, I'm talking about. And so how many of those would you have, I'm sorry?
Probably 6.
So how much space would that be?
Well, for turnout, let me think how I put this. There's a few different ways you can do those. You can configure them. There's different ways of doing it that allows the animal more walking. Instead of it being a rectangular shape, a new design has been to make them narrower and almost like corridors, 20 to 30 feet wide and then long and then turning. And they've shown that that actually helps the horse to get a lot more movement in, and it also prevents the grass from getting quite as tore up as it does in a square or rectangle shaped paddock.
I am concerned about the runoff and where it would go.
No, that's a very valid point. We're approaching this we love Hitchcock Woods, and we will do anything necessary to make sure, if this goes forward, to make sure that there's no damage to that, because that's, you know, a priceless community treasure. And so I can understand the concern on that. And if need be, we'd get an engineering workup on that and see if that would be necessary. We have not at this point done that, but if need be, you know, we could do that if there's a concern.
Thank you.
I have a quick question. So, based on a few of your answers, I'm still trying to come down on which side of the intent of your boarding facility. Is it long-term boarding for people who are looking for easy access to the woods, a place to keep their horses? You know, there's one in Fox Chase already that kind of serves a purpose like that. Or, as you mentioned in a couple answers, is it more for a transient Aiken Horse Show, show in the woods, all kinds of horse show events that come to Aiken, and be a lot more transient flip that way on your boarding?
What we're kind of visualizing is that it would basically be half and half. 4 stalls would be self-care, which that I'm aware of, there's very extraordinarily limited self-care stables on the woods. Stable on the Woods, of course, is a full board stable. And there's many riders who are very particular about how their horse is cared for, and they prefer to do it themselves. So we were looking to have half would be self-care, half would be completely transient. People coming in for horse shows, coming in for hunts, things of that nature, short-term boarding.
I guess my biggest concern at this point is those 5 lots on the woods have been there for quite a bit of time.
Yeah.
They recently put that model home on there a year or 2 ago, but there's no one out there. So how, you know, to allow a commercial boarding facility there is one thing. People are clearly moving into an equestrian type of development, would expect to live next to horses, completely understand that. It's the aspect of a much more of a temporary boarding deal where you're going to have, you know, RVs, sleep-in trailers, and a real transient crowd kind of constantly turning over. I'm trying to picture the prospective resident next to all that. It's one thing to look out and enjoy 8 horses on a well-kept lot.
Absolutely.
Being turned out, and it's another thing to have 3 squatters on there every weekend, you know, coming and go. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So that's the concept I'm really wrestling with here, and I'm not really getting a defined purpose. I mean, clearly you'd lease or do anything you could to anybody who had horses, whether it be for a weekend or for long term. But I guess we're sort of in between allowing a commercial boarding facility that's going to keep horses. I would have zero problem with that. It's the other potential aspect of it, because most of your facilities around here that I'm aware of, and I own a couple horses, so I have a little familiarity with some of the other facilities, are just long-term boarding. Certainly when they have open stalls and their special events, certainly they'll squeeze in. But generally they're there to lease out long-term for permanent boarding or semi-permanent boarding. This is a bit of a new concept that I think you're trying to introduce here, that shoehorning that into a residential setting, albeit a horse residential setting, is what I'm kind of noodling through.
And you're absolutely correct. There's no question there would be more traffic. And even a full board stable where the horses are permanently boarded, there's going to be more traffic than there would be with a residence.
Sure.
So those are very valid points.
What's your, just for background, what's your equestrian interest, background, experience?
Well, actually, my degree is in counseling, but I went to University of Kentucky and worked several years while I was working on my master's degree. I worked on the horse farms out there, and obviously I was raised with riding and horses, but I worked as a show groom going through graduate school, so I had quite a bit of hands-on experience doing that, and then continued riding after graduate school.
And so you obviously own your own horses or have horses? Or?
I do not own them currently.
Okay.
We moved to South Carolina a few years ago, and we're in Lexington right now, which is not an equestrian area. Very limited horse boarding in that area.
Okay.
But in answer to your question, yeah, absolutely, and that's a valid concern. There would be more traffic coming in there, and you know, we want to be completely transparent.
Yeah, no, I certainly not, no nefarious motives on your part.
No,
Certainly understand that.
no.
I just, living next to horses is one thing, but living next to people who are living next to their horses, albeit a couple weeks at a time, may be a little something that
It's,
I'm thinking about.
Yeah, and you know, one potential response would be, well, if you move somewhere and there's already an established business, you can't really complain about the business because you moved in with, sorry, that's my phone.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. I would just say if there's an established business, I would say, you know, a buyer needs to do their due diligence before they buy property and not expect the surrounding area to conform to them.
Sure, just don't want to poison the well, because those particular 5 lots have struggled mightily trying to get up and going. They've been there quite a long time.
They have.
And I suspect traffic, as some people have already alluded to, is a piece of that puzzle. You can't beat the juxtaposition to the woods. But
Yeah, and that's what first drew our attention to it, was simply access to the woods, and that there's very limited boarding potential on the woods, except for stable on the woods and the one, I believe, in Fox Chase.
Right.
And we were kind of listening to what people were saying of a bit of frustration that it can be a little bit difficult, and a lot of staging goes on at Stable of the Woods and a few other locations, and that, oh gee, wouldn't it be nice if there was more choices?
Yeah, the only difference between those other two are stuff like horse trailers and or would-be RVs and all that would not be you know, on a property line next to a guy's house. See what I'm saying?
Absolutely. And if money was no object, we'd buy all 5 lots.
Well, I
And then we
hear you. Now you're on to something.
Yeah, absolutely. And we will gladly take donations.
Sure.
But-
I have no further questions. Thank you.
Now, do you plan to have a stable on your property?
We would probably eventually put in a pleasure stable
Okay.
for our personal horses, yes.
I did have a couple of questions.
Karen?
Do you plan on implementing sort of a set of rules for the boarders that come in? For example, coming from the horse industry myself, we saw people that would dry their winter blankets on the fences. They would throw wraps over the fences and hay bales strewn about, et cetera. Not everybody's standards are the same as far as keeping things tidy. So are you going to put something in place that when someone comes, you can't, you know, keep your feet out by your paddock, and things will have to be, you know, no blankets on the fences? If you have a horse that cribs, you know, maybe that's not allowed, or they have to wear the collar, et cetera, et cetera. Is that something that you're going to enforce with that?
You know, I believe the more you can have communicated at the very beginning, the better. And our vision of this would be very small and very selective. We want it to be the type of facility, if this goes forward, that many, many, many people would want to board at, so we can be a little more selective and maintain a standard that, you know, I'm sorry, this is the standard. If you can't comply with that, then blessings. You know, like, you know, the more you have pre-planned, pre-worked out, and pre-communicated before somebody brings an animal there, the better. So absolutely, 100%.
Almost contractual that they have to.
Absolutely. Yeah.
To that same effect regarding the RV vehicles, would you agree that the majority of horse people don't have sort of the traditional tow-along full RV? It's typically like the 2-horse straight load with the living quarters in the front. And so is that what you're anticipating seeing more of versus?
We were trying to keep it a little flexible because there are some who have more, who have larger, you know, and with a sleeping facility in it. So we were kind of going, well, would that give flexibility? Would that make it more, ideally, you know, it'd be better if this was a much larger space because it would give a lot more flexibility on that. And I can't say we've worked out every last detail on this, but the idea of the RV was also that if somebody has an extended trailer, let's say a 4-horse trailer or something, they would have a very solid pad to park it on, and they wouldn't be, you know, they can withstand the weight.
Thank you.
I have one more question, Mr. Chairman. And this kind of dovetails into Karen's initial question about rules. Are you prepared to uphold the maintenance criteria in Section C, the 11 items of maintenance that you must abide by to maintain this?
Absolutely. We would be living next door, so anything happening there would be directly affecting us. So not just, you know, adhering to the policies, but also it's all in our best interest also to make sure that everything is maintained the way it ought to be.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have further questions from the board to Ms. Wilson? Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Do we have others to speak to the special exception request? Final call, others to speak to the special exception request? Seeing here none, the chair will now entertain a motion so we can enter a period of discussion.
Can I ask a question before we
Yes.
do that? Of the city?
City?
Yeah, is that okay? A special exception on a property that's zoned single-family stable, I thought that you couldn't, and just clarify this for me, that we couldn't grant a special exception based on any financial reasons.
You cannot grant it exclusively because of financial decision. The impact of financial decisions got, you know, obviously these are all, you know, transactions that will be financial in some fashion if they're commercial. But you cannot grant a special exception or variance based solely on financial benefit.
Isn't that what this is for?
I'm not sure how you would separate a commercial use from finances. I mean, it's part of the business. I'm not sure I'm getting what you're asking.
I just thought we couldn't grant a special exception for a property zoned the way this is zoned.
Oh, well, no.
If it's
no,
based on, and if it's for financial gain.
If the reason for the request is to improve financial return, you know, residential properties such as this can be developed for a surprising range of non-residential uses, such as schools, golf courses, things of that nature. These are all uses that are permitted as special exceptions if granted by this board. Each one of them has a financial transaction aspect to them. So you could not grant a special exception saying that you can do something that will make it more profitable, but the fact that it is a commercial undertaking is, you know, that That would not prohibit you. The idea that there would be financial gain, a profit, that would not prohibit the board from granting a special exception. I'm talking way much more than I need to, I think, but I think.
I believe that only pertains to variances, the commercial consideration. Profitability not to be considered, the fact that property may be developed more profitably, should a variance be granted, may not be considered grounds for a variance, not special exception.
Not a special exception, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Brecht. He's correct. I was just thinking of the 11 criteria for special exception, and finances don't come into play.
Okay, thank you.
I have another potential question for the city. If the request is accepted, who governs her formulation of a plan on this particular property? How is that to be, I don't know if regulate is the right word, but who is she to submit a plan to, and how does that?
She would they would have to submit a plan for development of the property to the planning department, demonstrating how they are meeting the development criteria, development requirements for the development as they apply to the property from the zoning ordinance. And the planning department would be bound by any conditions or specific requirements of the special exception. Once the project is built, then they would be required to, they would be checked periodically to guarantee that they're abiding by those maintenance standards that apply to both pleasure and commercial stables, as well as the complaint procedure contained in paragraph D.
Yeah. Now, of course, the curb cut will be the responsibility of the owners in developing the property. I'm going to get back to Nancy's question. What about the road maintenance? Since it's in the city, the road maintenance will be maintained by the city?
Woods End Way is a city street, and it was accepted by the city when the subdivision was developed. So maintenance of the street is city responsibility.
Any further discussions? Hearing none, the chair would entertain a motion. Those in favor of the motion, did we have a motion?
We had no motion.
We'll have a motion. The chair would entertain a motion. We should have had a motion before we started discussion. one transgender.
We did it. For the purpose of voting, let me I propose that we approve application number 18-92005 with the following conditions: that the subject property must comply with the requirements of section 3.3.21 D and D of the zoning ordinance, and the final order is to run with the land and be recorded in the Aiken County RMC office. Number 3 is to limit the number of horses to 8.
Do we have a second?
I second that.
John Branch, second. It's been properly moved and second that we approve the special exception request. Those in favor of the motion, show by
Are
raising.
we done with discussion at this point, or?
Discuss some more.
Want to discuss more?
Well,
We're open for
I would
discussion.
only throw out that
Don't want to rush you.
my main concern is the overnight occupancy, continual in and out. I would be open to in favor of the application, there's some way to restrict that activity. But
You know, I kind of wish I had asked the applicant if we didn't allow the overnight activity, would they still want to pursue this? Because I have a concern with that too.
You mean the overnight parking of sleeping
People staying there for short
Okay.
periods of time and leaving.
We may call the applicant back for additional questions from the board. Ms. Wilson. Again, would you read yourself into the minutes, please?
Ann Wilson, 132 Irene Way, Lexington, South Carolina.
Thank you. Brenda?
Well, I guess the question was if the ability for, now, I have no problem with leaving horse trailers, either an RV or whatever, on premise. That's a natural outreach or of having a commercial boarding facility. But if the ability for boarders to also sleep on premise, whether it's in their sleeper trailers or in an RV proper, if that were to be limited, what, tell us what your thoughts are on that.
Well, first I'd, obviously need to talk with my husband about it, and then we would, rework the configuration and see if that, forgive me, I can't quite give you exactly a yes/no answer. Obviously, we would, think about it and work out the numbers, and if it worked, great. And
I guess the question is, does the attractiveness of your commercial boarding facility reside with the ability of the people boarding their horses to also stay on premise with them?
Is it a make or break? I'd say no. Do I feel it's a unique aspect of it? Yes. But, once again, at this point, I wouldn't want to give a definitive yes or no. Just, leave it to your judgment of what you feel would be the most reasonable. And
All right, thank you.
thank you.
Answer? Does he have a question?
No, I think she answered it.
So do we need to add another condition?
Well, you made the movement. I mean, it's, I don't want to hang up the group. If everybody's ready to vote, they can vote. But I would say I'm going to have a problem voting for it unless there's an exception to some sort of limitation on the overnight ability of boarders.
Before we get into discussion, do we have any further questions for Ms. Wilson?
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Now, we enter the discussion before the vote.
You could always ask to add an amendment to it. I mean, to put another condition in from you.
Well, again, I'm fine with the whole commercial boarding aspect of it. I think it fits in well there. I think it'll give the chance for the area to hopefully fill out and fulfill its equestrian goal there. But I'm not keen on the
Having
people.
people there.
Yeah, just different weekend, different people, week at a time, 5 days at a time, 2 weeks at a time. I wouldn't want to live next to that. So part of what I'm thinking about is how you're going to fill out the other 3 lots that need to get sold there.
I guess my concern is the 2-week period. That's a long time for the, and I don't know a recreational vehicle have that capacity for someone to take a shower every day for 2 weeks and store that water on site. The period of time is what bothers me.
Well, if they weren't spending the night, there wouldn't be that problem.
No. Or they can stay at a motel.
And that's what most people do. I mean, I know it's a nice convenience because, you know, a lot of these horse trailers have sleeper capacity, but there's a difference between being a nice convenience and, for lack of a better word, promoting that ability to do so. I think you by nature would almost attract some of that activity, that transient activity that way. So, limiting it to a night or a weekend, 2 night, 48 hours, something like that, I'd be much more comfortable with. I'd probably be more comfortable eliminating it, but yeah, certainly a time restriction.
So how would you say that if you want to add it to the thing? No overnight? Yeah. I'm not opposed to adding that.
Okay.
If I might just add a point too, one of the considerations, I think, in including this amenity, a lot of times it's more to care for the horses. Often people want to stay on the premise because they want to do night check. My interpretation of what the services that are being offered, it's more of people have their trailers to bring their horses. They may be staying in a hotel. I'm just saying this is my interpretation coming from that world. I don't think it's necessarily somebody that's going RVing that has a horse. It sounds to me it's more of the convenience of having your hay storage and everything in your trailer for the time that you're there, a place perhaps for yourself to stay, to check on your horse of the evening, and not necessarily, I don't know if it's a concern for like the party atmosphere or the type of person that maybe would not be conducive to the community. I'm just wondering if it's less about sort of the camping and transient, but more the convenience to the people that are boarding there to have a place to stay, to check on their horse at 11 o'clock before they go to bed, to then retire for the night, because typically the horse people are up early in the morning and they don't really want to cause a problem. And it sounds to me like the type of client is going to be sensitive to that and probably very cognizant of the community, would be my interpretation. I would hate to limit that for the business, because I think the people that are coming for Hunt Week or the shows aren't necessarily looking at the overnight, the same way. It's more of a convenience in addition to the service that they're offering.
So it's your opinion that most of the people there would take that opportunity to spend the night with their horses at a boarding facility? Has that been your experience?
I think it really depends on the discipline and the reason that they're in town, and people that come in the woods to ride in the woods even for a weekend. It's the type of person to stay in that caliber of place that I feel is potentially being proposed. It's going to have a broad spectrum, but it's also going to be a certain type that's there for the care of their horse, a high quality experience, and not necessarily something that's going to detract from the community. I think the concerns are valid because there's always that one person, but it sounds to me the RV is, again, not someone coming to camp, it's coming to facilitate supplies and care for the horse and not necessarily live in that trailer for 2 weeks. It's just another sort of angle to look at it, and I think that that's worth considering for a different client.
Yeah, yeah, for me, it's just a different set of people in their neighborhood.
Yeah.
So, no problem checking on horses and all that kind of stuff. It's the overnighting on the premises next to residential lots that bothers me.
Yeah.
I don't have a problem either way putting the amendment in or not. I'm just telling you where I'm going. If there's movement to do something else, I'm fine.
Let me deviate just to assist in the discussion and allow potentially additional information. So, Mr. Stinson.
Thank you.
Would you read yourself into the minutes, please?
David Stinson, 560 Newberry Street Southwest. I just want to, for the sake of the point you're raising and that you've raised, one reason the developer is not here tonight is that he is totally supportive of this. I am his realtor, and we've had a lot of discussions about this. He thinks all aspects of her proposal, he's seen it, he's read it, he's aware of it. He thinks all aspects of her proposal fit the community and fit the typical usage. He also owns the stable on the woods on Dibble Road, and there are numerous places to either use a small cabin there or a little duplex or park your trailer there. And it's never been a situation of, party town or disruptions. It's horse people who come and work their horses, as you say. So I just wanted to clarify that the developer is fully aware of what she's asking and feels very comfortable that it fits the use of the neighborhood and would not, because you bring up a good point, his investment there, but he feels this is totally in keeping with what he's trying to create there, which is an equestrian community that has a multiplicity of uses for people who ride.
Any questions to Mr. Stinson?
No.
Thank you. I think what we are trying not to create is another campsite for recreational vehicles.
Right.
And because, again, this will be a residential area, and having been in that world once before, you can plan a lot of night activities with a campsite that could be very noisy and disruptive to the rest of the community. So I would think that to care for one's horses, that we could limit the overnight stay to 2-3 days or whatever, to allow the owner to feel comfortable with the care and the safekeeping of their animals.
But then there'll be even more transient if you limit it to the number of nights.
Well, transit in terms of a unit being able to stay there for longer periods of time, stay overnight in the unit.
Isn't the safety valve here the component D within the zoning ordinance, where if someone can complain if there is a problem, the planning and zoning can review and maybe perhaps revoke the special exception if there is a problem? Isn't that this safety net here for these concerns?
Not really, John. It's a somewhat of a safety, but not to handle all the situations that you described.
But then,
But I'm sorry, but if someone complains, registers a complaint with zoning, then the item is going to have to be, the issue is going to have to be addressed as stated in the zoning ordinance. So if there is a problem with boarding, partying, whatever the concerns are, and there is a formal complaint lodged, then it can be addressed.
I'd be hesitant to set something up myself, knowing that, oh, if somebody complains,
Yeah.
I might have to change my whole direction. I'd want to know that that couldn't happen to me.
But also, now, I'm not a member of the horse community, so I don't know this, but I would think if anybody had an investment in horses, like I'm assuming horses and facilities and all that, they're not going to be partying and causing disturbances they want their horses settled down so they'll be ready for in the morning show or ride or whatever. And like I say, I'm not a horse person, so.
I'm just saying I wouldn't want to do this myself, knowing that, oh, they can pull the rug out from under me.
Right.
It's good, we have a motion, we can vote.
Yeah. The motion maker was asking if we wanted to amend the motion, and I would feel comfortable with overnight accommodation for 2 or 3 days for the individual to live in the overnight accommodation vehicle, limited to 2 or 3 days. The vehicle can be parked there for the period of time.
But as Karen said, they're there to take care of the horse.
Right. Well,
The other factor that may be in consideration is if somebody, for example, was boarding at the facility but was showing at Highfields across town, they may be shipping in and out to go to the show, to then park at night to stay there. So you're almost resetting their arrival time if you start saying, okay, starting today. I feel like the RV component is really just to allow for the horse trailers that have living quarters. Not all of them are going to. They're sort of a means to, if they're going to ride in the woods or go to the show across town, as opposed to something permanent for 2 weeks that someone's living in. That would be, in my experience, probably exceptional. If they were here for a series, that may be the case, but they're still going to be perhaps transporting their horse. That would be the primary function of that RV being on the property. Just another perspective to look at it that way, so they're not actually squatting for the 2 weeks.
Yeah, we're probably splitting hairs, and I agree. There either needs to be a motion to kind of eliminate the overnight aspect of it, or just allow it. I don't.
I agree with that.
I agree. It's kind of hard. There's no real good way to do anything in between.
Okay.
So, whatever you're comfortable with.
Okay, I'm gonna leave it as is.
Okay.
do we have any further discussion?
Well, my discussion is I'd like it amended, but
Did you want to amend
I
it?
can't amend her motion.
What did you want to amend it to?
To no overnight stay, and then that way they can have commercial stays.
Well,
But-
if she accept the amendment,
Yeah. No, because I'm with Karen, and like I said, I'm not a horse person, so I don't know. But if somebody stays on the property with their trailer that can carry 2 horses and the food and their sleeping thing, they're there to take care of the horse. So that's, I want to leave it like it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
are you comfortable with that, Nancy?
No, but I'll vote, accordingly. Is there a
Okay.
second on the motion?
I second.
Yeah.
John
On the
did.
motion, yes.
Yeah, John did second.
Those in favor of the motion, show by raise of the right hand. Those opposed, same right. The motion carries 5-2.
I need to do.
4-2.
So how math gets us every time.
4-2. The motion carries. That is the other item, last item on the agenda, and the chair would entertain a motion for adjournment.
I so move.
Second.
Been properly moved and second. There's not a vote. We stand adjourned.